Welcome, I'm Andy, this is Brainbuzz. Today I'm going to do a deep dive look at the instrument cluster of the Ioniq 5. That's the screen behind the steering wheel. There are a ton of really great visual touches to their UI, and quite a few really bizarre UX decisions that really hamper the experience, and in fact even make it a bit of a safety issue. So, let's dive in. Here's the screen you get when you first get in. You can see that they display the mileage and the gear selector. There are no actual gears anymore, so maybe that term should change. Either way, I'm going to push the start button to turn on the Ioniq 5 so you can see the startup sequence. I will note that there is another startup animation that plays, I think, as you unlock the car and first get in, but I can't seem to replicate that easily yet. So, this is the full startup sequence. Okay, I'm going to rewind and pause the screen at various spots to talk about this a little bit. So here you can see the main UI loads and goes through an animation. But the really hilarious part is how it tests the warning lights. See, in older cars, the startup sequence would turn on all the little bulbs behind the gauges. This was done so that users and mechanics could test if the bulbs were burnt or not. But this is a screen. There's zero reason to show all these icons on a screen during startup. It's a relic of the past, and it's a really stupid thing to include. Even weirder is that in order to run this fake startup sequence, they had to modify the placement of the main graphics. That whole speed tray, for lack of a better term, is smaller on startup because they need room for the icons. This is really bizarre. I don't know what would happen if those lights actually needed to turn on. Would the speed tray show the smaller version while you're driving? I have no idea, but I really don't like confusion in UX. As a user, I want the UI to be predictable. The better option here would have been to just load the main screen from the start without any of those distracting icons and movement, since they serve no purpose anyway. Once that's done, they pop up this giant circle telling me I'm ready to drive. Do I really need this screen? More importantly, do you need to make it 1/3 of the screen covering important information like my range? They could have easily found a much nicer way to display this. Okay, now that we're loaded up and ready to drive, let's take a look at the layout of this screen. First, let's talk about the gear selector display. It's set up to mimic the same layout as the stock, but the problem is the gear selector is a rotary selector, so up and down don't actually represent the gears. I guess it's mostly that it isn't aligned with the rest of the icons. And there's no reason for that. They had tons of room in order to make that happen. So you can see the letter gets a little bit bigger and darker when it's selected. And it goes red for reverse. Now, let's talk about the sensor display. Again, they pop up this circle covering 1/3 of the screen. It's redundant. They already have the car displayed in the middle. Why wouldn't they just pivot that car to display the sensor details there? The sensors are only active when going very slow or stopped, so it doesn't take anything away from the usability. Especially since, I can confirm, I have never used that sensor display because the exact same thing is shown on the infotainment screen, but bigger and with a live video feed. This is already redundant, so why cover the screen like this? And again, they cover 1/3 of the screen to remind me that I hit the park button 1 second ago. Why do you need this? Along the bottom is a more prominent status bar showing a variety of stats in a font that's way too small in my opinion. Most of this information is pretty useless. And To be honest, I have no idea what ready means. It's just always there, and it's always ready, so why do they need to display that? It shows your battery percentage, but I use the range number in the big font above. It shows the temperature outside, and your average energy use, and your mileage as well. And those are all things that you will mostly ignore, so the small font is not really a big deal. However, you see the LV3 area next to the battery? That's your regeneration level. Normally, I might be inclined to say this is not very important once you set it. But the big issue here is that Hyundai has made the ridiculously stupid decision to not allow users to set iPedal to the default. If I set the car to iPedal, which I can't even do right now, by the way, because they force you to actually be driving before you can change it. But if I set it to iPedal, the next time I get in the car, it's reset to level 3. This is a big issue because it makes your braking unpredictable. You keep rolling instead of stopping. It's dangerous, and quite frankly, they should fix this. But since they don't want to do that, at least make this regen level bigger and much more visible so that I'm aware that my car won't stop when I expect it to. Now along the top you have your headlight display. I have no idea why they are placed where they are and not aligned with the rest of the UI or centered. Again, this is a digital screen, not a physical display, so there's no reason to do this. As a principle of UX design, you want to place things in familiar places so users build muscle memory of where to look. But that rule isn't so restrictive that it can't move over a few pixels. Below that, you have your center display. By default, you get this very copied from Tesla display of your car. Next to the car display, when you hit the menu icon on the steering wheel, you get the drive info screen. There are also subscreens on these, but I won't be going into detail as the design is the same and this is a design video. Next to that is your navigation. When you're not using navigation, this displays a basically useless compass. But with navigation, it shows your nav details in there. If you have the head-up display, this is a completely useless display. Also, if you use Android Auto or CarPlay for your nav, this is a completely useless display. I haven't used it yet, but I believe it only shows your next turn, not a fancy map view like Audi or Tesla. But I could be wrong. And finally, next to that is the car info. It's showing the power distribution, so you can see the battery level in the middle, and the bars will light up to show where your energy is going as you're driving. And it also shows tire pressure if you want. Alright, I think that's a good place to stop for this week. These videos are going to get really long, so I have to break them up into separate parts. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about the different drive modes and how they change the UI. And then in future episodes, I'll talk about the visual design and the nice digital design touches that they added to the white mode of the screen. See you next week.